We have a quorum. Excuse me. If you make another comment, I already gave a warning after we started the meeting now. You're going to be asked to leave if you're disrupting this meeting. That is the final warning. I'm joined by my colleagues, council members O'Farrell and Buscaino. Thanks for being here. We're going to jump right into, we have another council member here visiting our committee. We will take that out of order before we go into multiple comment cards. And on item 2, I'm going to ask Councilwoman Martinez, would you prefer to come up with the department first and then we'll go into multiple comment cards because we do have comments on this, or would you prefer to hear multiple comment cards? I just don't know what your calendar is. Sure. Okay. All right. So we'll go ahead and call up Eric Previn. And Eric, you're on items 1, 2, 4, 6, 7, and 8. And then general public comment after that. So 2 minutes on those items, and 1 minute on general public comment as it pertains only to this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. It's Eric Previn from CD2. I live in Studio City. Item number 2 is zeitgeisty today because we're concerned about harassment on the metro. There was a viral video that went around. The mayor, by the way, has an announcement soliciting people to come forward currently on the metro, which is impressive. You hear his voice just like at the airport. But yesterday that viral video was disturbing on a number of counts on both sides of the aisle, and I think even the mayor equivocated.
That's not on this agenda item.
No, harassment on the transit system.
Yeah, but what you're talking about that's a different matter. If you look, go ahead and refer to the motion.
No, because I think that there are claims that an officer tried to remove someone for a mild infraction, and that resulted in disrespect to the officer. All sorts of conflict. I thought it was relevant. If you're going to deny me the opportunity to comment on it, that's upsetting. Item number 4, I'm surprised Rue is not here because he's been leading the charge on the party house ordinance, which I think a lot of residents are excited about. It's a escalating series of citations. One thought I had, and Mr. O'Farrell, you could follow up on this if you wouldn't mind. The Sportsman's Lodge in Studio City regularly emits these kinds of noises. It's not a residence, though, to be fair. It is a business. So are there different ordinances that would address that, or can it be included? Because I know many of the neighbors in our area have struggled with the same thing, and they get away with it. And I think that feels like a double standard. Now, I'm not disagreeing that we should restrict that kind of activity, but it has to be fair. Item number 6 is an anonymous tip line for firearm recovery. Everybody loves anonymous tip lines. But I would say that you have to be extremely careful in that situation where people are pinning things on other people in a way that could be perceived as unsavory. In our neighborhood, Studio City, we have people going around saying if you leave a meeting, you are removed from the board, the neighborhood council board. It's just the most absurd interpretation, so we have to be very cautious about what we let through. Item number 7, just a technical error. You're claiming that it was a $75,000 donation from Pepperdine University for this training program. It's actually valued at $50,000 by the group themselves in your item, so check that and reduce it appropriately. Item number 8 is Mitchell Englander in April provided the APR private partner. He said, I will take care of this, don't worry. And he did, and here it is. And it's a kind of a tiered system. I think it's in the right area to try to get people routed properly. But one concern that has come up by other constituents is that it not be a kind of opportunity to scan people by class or ethnicity or other things and then route the kind of homeless folks to the lousy service and everybody else to the ER. I know that that's not the intention of it. And I also have to say, because Bonin is not here today, but Bonin is an advocate for RFPs. When you pick a partner privately, sir, it does not give the feeling that many of the other medical providers in the community had a fair chance to also offer a public-private partnership. So I would simply ask in the future that you have an RFP. I mean, nobody wants to say no to a generous donation, but there may be other generous donors who were just as eager to have it, and we may have even gotten a better deal. So that's my comment. Now, for general public comment, I would simply say the following. Nobody reveres the fire department more than you, sir, except for me. And when the fire department is faced with conflicting information, there is an expectation to the taxpaying public that they bring that forward. Now, with regard to the origin of the Skirball fire, I am highly concerned about the facts as they line up. And I believe that the LA Times made a report that was misleading, at the very least misleading. possibly outright wrong. And for that reason, I would ask the fire department and the chief to bring to the attention of the newspaper of record in our community that error so that it can be corrected. There's a sentence in their initial report on December 12th about the origin of that fire that is inaccurate, and it's harmful, and it continues to fly on the masthead, if you will, of the Los Angeles Times in a way that is, I believe, hurtful to an entire class of constituents. So with all respect to the fire department and the work they're doing, I would ask that they contact the LA Times today and take care of that, and thank you for your time.
All right, next speaker, Wayne. Mr. Spindler. Items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Those are all items, and then, so 2 minutes.
Bill E. Goat, go ahead.
So thank you so much. This is my first meeting.
If you're going to make animal sounds and not
Well,
participate in the actual
Yeah,
items on the agenda, animal sounds are not on the agenda. You're going to be
They
asked to
are.
forfeit your
He's a
time. That's your
goat.
final warning.
He's a goat. So go ahead.
Fuck you. Now, I want to talk about number 1, domestic violence and immigrants. Well, the way to stop that shit is to go into the 6th district and shut down the strip clubs that are womanizing women. You know, they dance on the poles like this, and they grind themselves like this for a bunch of hairy, bearded men. That's no way to treat women. So shut down these goddamn clubs. Drinking and prostitution and drugs. But Nerdy will not do that, so she makes excuses like Donald Trump. I'm working on the problem. No, I'm taking money from the lobbyists. No, I'm working on the problem. No, I'm taking money from the owners of the strip clubs. I'm a dichotomy. On the one hand, I'm a greedy politician. On the other hand, I'm a social advocate. Which is it? Will these beach for once tell us what side of the fence you're on? Advocacy or greed? So now we get to number 2. Mta Sexual Harassment. Every time you get on those crowded trains on the red line and the buses, you always have people rubbing up on you. Yes, they're rubbing up on you all the time. And that's because the buses and the subways are overcrowded. Make more fucking buses and more red line cars, and then we won't have to have this shit. 2 fucking minutes? That's not enough to talk, you little fucking dwarf. So now I get into the public comment. In front of a police officer, I was threatened as a goat from not making an animal sound. Threatened by Mitchell Englander in front of an LAPD captain. He says, you dare you make one noise, and I'll have you thrown out of this room. Because when I'm in the room without a quorum, I'm the meeting. Are you going to tolerate this shit, Mr. City Attorney? Are you aware Mr. Englander is a named defendant currently in a federal court case? Of course you are. But you're going to let him do it. Why? Because he's a short dick man, and he doesn't get any at home, and he can't get any on his staff, especially after settling a sexual harassment.
Your time is up. You're not on anything under the purview of this committee. Please cut his time. Now you're disrupting this meeting.
You're a sexual harassment.
Sergeants, please show him out. Please leave the meeting. Sergeants, please show him out immediately. He's still disrupting this meeting. Please show him out. Thank you.
Isn't he a predator?
Thank you. Every single committee meeting. And now we'll hear the same thing from Herman. Come on up. No more warnings, so stick to the items, and you know all the rules.
The only rules I follow are the Brown Act, and since we're dealing with sexual harassment and I don't have to use intensifiers or vulgarity, as you already see the contemptuous situation of sexual assault, domestic violence, crimes against women, crimes against illegal DACA immigrants in our community. And why? Because we have a process called frustrated politicians who cannot
You're not
resolve
speaking
our
on the agenda.
domestic
Speak on the
violence
item.
or
Which item are you speaking to?
sexual assaults.
Which item?
And then when we go into the metropolitan area of, like Mr. Spinner noted for the record, that yes, you would add additional trains to the red line, additional buses to service lines. You won't have a man's penis in your face. You won't have a woman's pussy in your face. And people could have more room to sit and enjoy their ride by using public transportation. And then I go to item 5, victim assistance program. Well, just sitting in here, I feel threatened. I'm being coerced not to say what I feel is going on as far as my opinion. And I take that threat very serious according to the Bain Act. As you heard, Mr. Spinner was threatened for making little animal noises. Really? I want the award to go not just to the Los Angeles County, but it should be statewide. Anyone threatened and become a victim of threats need assistance, and we should accept the grant. And then my last item, number 6, the right to protect ourselves, the Second Amendment, constitutional protection. Well, if Mitch Englander can hold a weapon at his ankle and not have it registered, why can't we protect ourselves in illegal firearms recovery rewards? Now my general public comment. Thank you, Rue, for showing up late. It's 8:54 for the record. We understand why there's racist, bigots, prejudiced motherfuckers in our city. We know why. Because we allow predators to sit on committees, in chairs, and say that, oh, I'm against women's rights. We should tell them that they have big asses and that they have a right to sit anywhere in City Hall and flash their flashy clothing to us so we can prey on them, like you heard Mr. Spindler say. Mr. Englander, staff and himself were involved in sexual harassment. Jose Weezer is still sitting in his
You're not
chair.
taking the items under the purview of this committee.
Sexual harassment, sir. Sexual
items under
harassment
the
is part of
purview
this
of this
public
committee.
safety committee. So fucking stop interrupting me under the Brown Act and stop fucking coursing my public comment to the Bain Act. Fuck you, you fucking Jew, for putting an innocent man on a tree. Fuck you. 42 U.S.C. 1983.
All right, now you're disrupting this meeting. Okay, show him out. You're disrupting the meeting. Sergeants, please show him out. He's still disrupting this meeting. Continuing to. Stop disrupting this meeting. Herman, stop yelling out and disrupting this meeting. Stop yelling out. Out. Stop disrupting this meeting. Thank you. Thank you. I think it's all city staff here today. Is there any visitors that have never been to this committee or any committees? I'm sorry? It's going to take a lot more than that.
The microphones.
Yeah. Anyway, we have all members of the committee are now here, so thank you for being here as well. And we're going to go ahead now. That concludes all the general public comment. We'll close general public comment. It also includes any cards for any items that people filled out to speak. So we'll go ahead and close the submission of cards on any items. And go ahead and welcome up. We'll take item, actually, we'll go ahead and take item 2. Move to that. So if we can ask Councilwoman Martinez to come on up along with our chief, Bob Green.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Should I go first?
Whatever you prefer.
Pleasure to be here again, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councilmember Englander, for scheduling this motion today. Colleagues, I introduced this motion for many reasons, but mainly because I want to ensure that the people who ride our public transit systems are being protected from harm, especially sexual harassment and violence. What alarmed me was that our trains and our buses are basically enclosed areas where victims have very little room to escape. I just couldn't imagine a victim, what that victim would feel like if she ever endured.
Excuse me for 1 second. Sergeants, escort them off the floor. They're disrupting, out of the building. They're disrupting this meeting right outside the door, screaming, yelling, and making animal sounds. And we cannot hear even a presentation from another colleague who's at the table on a microphone through closed doors. So they need to be removed from the building immediately. Sergeant, go ahead and remove them from the building. Call up extra security if we need to. They're still disrupting, continuing even now. They need to be removed from the building for the day, for disrupting this meeting where we can't actually move forward on the people's work. So please have them removed from the building for the day. Thank you.
Thank you. I just couldn't imagine what a victim must feel like having to endure harassment by another passenger, or even worse, assault or an indecent exposure with whoever happens to be riding on that train or bus. Riders do not always report instances of harassment on the metro system. If a rider does not report, then it becomes more difficult for us to combat that crime. I want to thank Metro for developing their It's Off Limits marketing campaign, for educating the public on how to report these incidences, and for bringing Peace Over Violence to provide a counseling hotline. But I also want to thank LAPD for their efforts that they have made since they took the contract over almost 6 months ago, for providing a greater presence on the buses, trains, and platforms, and for working diligently to figure out how to address this issue. As we are growing our mass transit system, the last thing we want or need is to lose the confidence of our riders. Part of being a world-class system is providing a safe experience for everyone. The safety of passengers should remain our #1 priority. I would like to see in the future a comprehensive approach to address this issue and incorporate LASA as well. More visibility and education on how to report these crimes, a better coordination with Peace Over Violence on what type of data they can ask and capture through their hotline. And in order to get a comprehensive picture of what incidences are occurring in LAPD so that we can do a better job of combating these issues. I look forward to working with LAPD and Metro to ensure that we keep the priority front and center. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Chief?
So as the members know, we took over the contract in July 1st. But the first thing I'd like to point out is that when it comes to sexual harassment, just the mere presence, and our entire model is built on high visibility presence. Our officers don't drive cars. They roll call in 4 locations on the system itself. For 9 hours, they ride that system back and forth. High visibility with hats on. We park decoy cars out so that there's a presence of law enforcement officers. We first started to deploy officers on the Blue Line in May, and then built out to a full deployment in July 1st. And if you look at on page 3 of the fact sheet that I pushed out, the sexual harassment numbers that were reported to Peace Over Violence, but in February of 53, or a total of 64, they've dropped to, in May, started dropping dramatically to 45, 21, 27, and the last in September to 12. And so the mere presence of our officers have had a dramatic effect on just stopping it based on their presence. We built a strong relationship with MTA and Peace Over Violence. Peace Over Violence is working with us to develop increased reporting data. The current data that we're able to access doesn't give us accurate locations and times, and so we're working to get more specific information to bring in better patterns for reporting. What we found is many of the folks involved in lewd conduct, in touching activity, are they're frequent flyers. We're about to have a press conference with an individual that's already had 9 convictions, and we just, he pled out to 4 additional counts. He'll be in custody through July, but it shows you those are 9 convictions and arrests, and so the number of times that he's been involved in the activity is probably tenfold. And so we've built a strong database on folks that we know, and we've got information from the Sheriff's Department that are frequent flyers. The nice thing about the system is there's video, and so when we get a report with a date and time specifically, we can go back to the video and 9 out of 10 times make an arrest and get a prosecution. So at this time, I'm open to any questions that the committee may have for transit.
Well, thank you very much, and I want to thank Councilwoman Martinez for bringing this forward as well, and the focus on this. Just a couple questions based on the data sheet that we received. These numbers, they say number of incidents in the top of the column, but then the footnote and disclaimer says available arrest data does not include premise codes. Are these incidents or actual arrest numbers?
I'm sorry, which page you referred to, sir?
Is this the one that you furnished?
Oh, those are actual arrests. Those are all arrests.
So those are arrests, because it says number of incidents, so it should say number of arrests.
No, those are arrests.
Okay, so do we know the number of incidents that didn't effectuate an arrest?
So the total number of crimes reported, different from sexual harassment reports, were 57 since July. 7 of those are categorized as rape. In all but one of those rapes, the victim suffered significant mental illness in the report. And so one of the things we're confronted with is probably the most significant policing challenge we have on the system. It's the number of homeless people on the system and the folks that are suffering from mental illness that are in crisis on the system.
Chief, you mean the perpetrator, not the victim,
No,
suffered mental illness?
no, actually the victim
The
did.
victim actually
Significant
suffered
mental illness to where the claims don't make sense. I mean, they're clearly somebody that's in crisis and having cognitive issues.
Got it. Okay, prior to the incident.
Right.
Thanks for that clarification.
Prior and during the incident. So part of our challenge is we actually pay people from our mental evaluation unit every day to ride the system just to be proactive and identify folks that are in crisis. We've rolled out a whole HOPE component with transit. They've been very supportive of it. But the system, it's a really significant challenge for us now, and will continue to be. We're in the middle of discussions about rolling out a full-time city multi-agency coordination center that we'd open up, bringing all the departments in that are have anything to do with homeless. And we're in discussions to do that now to see if we can partner with Metro and the city family to be more aggressive and coordinate our information better, because everybody's trying very difficult, but there's not a coordinated effort right now. So I think that will give us a significant advantage on and off the system.
Yeah, no doubt. With that, and going back to the numbers, so we had, and you clarified 57, and that was as of July 1st when we took over the contract. The number of repeat offenders out of that 57, do we have an indication or not so much? Only from the arrests?
Of those 57 crimes that we've taken reports on from July 1st to, I think, the end of November, 7 were rape, 43 are sexual battery. And so when it comes to frequent flyers that we're talking about, there is a small population of individuals that are preying on people in the system. So our challenge is to identify those folks. We're working now with a neighborhood prosecutor to get stay-away orders on them once we get convictions, so they have to stay off the system for anywhere from 3 to 6 months. If they come on the system, we can take them into custody. So we're trying to come up with strategies that we're much more aggressive of keeping them off the system, including Assembly Bill 468 gives us the ability, and we're working with MTA now to implement this on the system. Anybody that's been convicted of any misdemeanor or felony having to do with violence, lewd conduct, possession or sales of controlled substances, we can also exclude them from the system. So we're trying to identify the target population that is creating issues on the system.
And that's an Assembly bill that's already passed and in law. Okay, great. Two real quick questions. I want to turn it over to my colleagues. The numbers we have are clearly from when we took it over. But those numbers exist prior to that, I would think, can be extrapolated from sheriff's data as well. And I'd be very interested in knowing and seeing so we can track over time. Now, it may have not been as accurate or it may be even more accurate. But at least it gives us, and as long as we have that footnote too, we should be able to go back a few years from now so we can benchmark it sooner and see what progress we're making rather than just from July. My suggestion would be to see if we can get some of our data technicians to pull some of the numbers prior to us taking it over as well. We certainly have other numbers from other types of arrests and offenders because we had to bid on this. So if we can pull some of that data moving forward, I think it would be very, very helpful, just knowing full well it's prior to LAPD taking it over, regardless who's in the uniform and what badge it is. These incidents happened. Now, the numbers and the reason I went there on this is 57 if we call the transit system a venue, if you will, I don't know of another venue in the city of LA that has these kinds of numbers, and maybe there are. I'm certainly not aware of it. This just seems shockingly high for a venue, if you will, or a mode of transportation, or, I mean, if you consider any other venue, if you will, that has this kind of population, be it a university, a major theme park. Now, while those are controlled much different because of who enters, whether it's a ticketed event or not, I get that. But I can't think of another location or venue, if you will, that has these kinds of numbers. But again, this could be doubled from last year, or this could be half. We don't know. And I think that's something we should see, so we can determine also moving forward, just not in this small snapshot of data, what resources really need to be deployed, and what's changed and not. So that would be my suggestion and comment moving forward on this as well.
Okay, to put things in perspective, 31 of the 57 crimes I talked about are in bus systems. And so the remaining, the number's much smaller for the subway systems we have within the city, which we have about 500,000 people travel on every day. On bus systems, we have thousands of bus lines within the city of Los Angeles with up to 1 million plus people that use the bus system every day. And so overwhelmingly, when you spread the numbers out, the population and the venue grows much bigger within the population. We've worked really diligently with data technicians in the Sheriff's Department to try and to get apples to apples to compare. It's been really challenging because the way the Sheriff's Department has the Transit Bureau set up, it's a single entity. And as you know, within the city of Los Angeles, we have reporting districts, we have MO codes, and we have premise codes. And so we've had to completely recreate new premise codes to get accurate data, and their data we can't pinpoint as accurately within the system as we now.
So interestingly is then these numbers are only in the city portion of the metro system as well.
Correct.
That's a problem.
Right.
Okay. I'd like to turn it over to any of my colleagues that want to weigh in on this.
I'm in the queue, yeah.
Okay, please.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your leadership, Ms. Martinez, on this very important issue. And Chief Green and LAPD, thank you for your great work. I was for years an advocate for handing this contract over to the LAPD, because for years I worked right across the street from a metro stop at Hollywood and Western, and almost never ever saw a sheriff, a county sheriff, below ground monitoring safety in the subway there. And I know that that's been a sea change since the LAPD took over the contract, and I couldn't be happier about that. One of the reasons I feel, just anecdotally, that you have numbers now is because you're actually enforcing. It wouldn't surprise me if we saw an increase in arrests, because it's my belief that previously there was inadequate attention paid to public safety on especially our subway metro systems, which I think is, if people don't feel safe riding the subway, especially women, they're simply not going to do it. And we need to do all we can to increase that as an option, as a viable option for commuters and anyone else who want to ride in the underground. So I want to commend the LAPD for their great work on this and heading in the direction you are. One thing that you mentioned is the Assembly bill. Has it passed through the Assembly? Is it waiting for signature?
It has passed, and now we're working with Transit to see how we're going to implement that to Transit Court and on the system.
Terrific. Because that, you mentioned one individual has been convicted after 9 arrests, but he still is able to get on the subway.
Correct. He actually has 9 convictions.
9 convictions.
He has, and I don't know the number of arrests, but to get 9 convictions, clearly he's been arrested many, many more times.
Right, for whatever, lewd conduct or whatever it may be, or assaults. But yet, after probationary periods, he's still able just to get right back on and continue. Right. That's a real problem. So hopefully the state bill can address that, because it's one thing that to have the occasional creep preying on someone, but it's entirely another thing to actually be physically assaulted or frightened because it's one person and one predator on the train. And we know that suppression is so important because predators will act out when they can get away with it, and that's just how it is. And they're going to gravitate toward places like a metro subway if there's not a public safety presence there. One question I have is in terms of the overtime shifts available to officers and just the full staffing up of the system from the LAPD in relation to Metro. How is that looking?
So the coast model has turned out to be a windfall for us. As you know, you may not know, the first time we used that model was at Los Angeles International Airport after 9/11 to get staffing increases. And because there's not a lot and abundance of overtime for police officers, they're very hungry to work at. I'll have as many as 200 to 300 officers on a standby list every day for every shift. So because it's so valuable, I'm able to hold a very, very high standard. If you're not on time, you don't come here with the equipment, you don't stay on the system, you don't do what you're told, you get sent home and you don't get to come back. We'll ban you, and based on the offense, maybe a 30-day ban, it could be a lifetime ban. So because of that, I have tremendous accountability and productivity within the system. Now, clearly, our goal is high visibility presence and verbal compliance. And overwhelmingly, we have literally hundreds of contacts a day with people for code of conduct violations, and rarely do we have an incident. And it's just because of the visible presence. The fact that we don't give them cars, they can't leave the system. And so they get a couple of 15-minute breaks throughout that system. But we really took a look at why Metro had to change law enforcement agencies 4 times in 20 years, and it's really engineering. And so I think we've engineered a model with the overtime model and with the full-time foot beats that keeps them where they need to be. So as of now, it works really well. 4 or 5 years from now, there may be a burnout phase, and so we're trying to look forward as to what the next model is going to be if we need to change models.
It's very encouraging to hear, and I think that the increased visibility will increase reports when someone has been a victim of a crime. I think that'll increase the willingness to report that crime, so that should help a lot. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah. We've actually predicted a Part 1 crime increase this year because of the visibility, the accessibility of police officers to report crime.
I would imagine so, and I would suggest that we don't be alarmed if the crime reporting goes up. I would see that as a good sign, actually, with this new contract.
Joe. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your hard work on this, Chief Green, and Ms. Martinez for your leadership on this, and I want to also commend the Metro Board as well for taking this on as an important issue. So, Chief Green, you mentioned the majority of these incidents, these arrests, initiated from buses.
The majority of the incidents of the 57 crimes
57 crimes, right.
July, 31 of those were on the bus system.
I'm sorry, I may have missed this, but what's our deployment like on buses?
So we deploy bus riding teams, and we have 30 officers a day.
Plain clothes, uniformed?
No, they're uniformed at this point. Now, this is a 3-year build-out for our contract. So the first special problems unit that we had available this year, we've transitioned to nothing but homeless outreach, and so they're uniformed. As of July 1st, I get 2 additional special problems units, which is a sergeant and 4 police officers. At that point, we'll have more leverage to start doing plainclothes operations. So the 30 officers a day that are deployed on buses, they're deployed over 3 shifts, so that gives me 10 officers or 5 bus riding teams. They're deployed based on data and operator complaints of where we're having the most significant issues on the bus line. So we evaluate that every day. We go to the RAP sessions and get feedback, and then based on the crime data and the feedback from the operators, that's where we determine we're going to deploy our officers.
And just like responding to a radio call, time is of essence. So can you walk me through the reporting process, the time it takes for the victim to reach out to this hotline? Or is there another way to report other than the hotline to the point where we make that physical arrest and the follow-up to put these thugs in custody and hold them accountable?
I'm sorry, so for the rail system, they have the rail operations center. And so anybody can flag down a police officer. They can notify the operator of the rail or the bus via buttons on in the cars. And immediately they'll notify the rail operations center or the bus operations center. They notify the police. Because we have a longer response time because we're on transit, one of the things that works really well in the city of Los Angeles is those 21 different geographic areas with our police cars respond to all the hotshots, and they stop the clock until we get there to stabilize it. So our response time to bus calls has been very good. And then the response time to rail calls is also good because I've got every black and white in the city that will jump those calls to get there too. So ultimately, we respond. If they want to make a crime report, we'll take a crime report, and it goes to the area that it occurs in. And then right now, we have 1 detective. That'll grow to 3. And those detectives are there just to coordinate through the 21 different geographic areas the information, put out information back and forth, and repeat offenders, and to share crime information. So far, that works really well. We had a robbery series on the Expo line that suspects participating in crime in West Bureau, in Culver City, and in South Bureau. And we were able to pull together an entity with the Sheriff's Department, Southwest detectives, officers from my shop, Gang Narcotics Division, school police, parole and probation, and went in a 3-day max deployment where they hit it really hard. They had 25 people that they detained, and they arrested 12 for robbery. And so it virtually stopped the robberies on the Expo line for a few weeks. So the coordination is good. I think it'll get better. Right now, we're looking at trying to identify weekly crime maps that'll take not just LAPD, but the county, Culver City, and Santa Monica together so we can identify the patterns quicker.
Do we CompStat you?
Yeah, so today, my captain is at CompStat. And so the crime numbers, if I have a crime number on transit, it's held against me and also the area captain or the bureau chief for that bureau. And we designed it like that because we wanted to force communication between the captains in the areas and on transit rail. So my captain is held accountable for every one of the crimes on transit, and it forces him to share information with all the area captains that share that area. And so we'll have combined task forces. Like in North Hollywood last week, we had a task force with North Hollywood officers where they put officers out on their overtime, and transit security. And they went in and wrote about 90 citations, made a number of arrests, just a high visibility task force. And so it's a great model because it puts pressure on both the commands to communicate. And Captain Pratt sits in CompStat every Wednesday with the area, and they ask him the same tough questions they ask here.
And our response times CompStat as well within the lines?
Yes, they are.
Because we're hearing just lengthy response times, and I understand you mentioned that it's a large system, but at the same time, we can have the areas supplement those response times, right, to get there quicker.
You bet. So the rail officers are the first response to calls for service on the rail. High priority calls, it gets put out to everybody, so we get a unit there as fast. Yeah.
Got it. And this is considered a code 2 call? Any sexual harassment?
Yeah, actually, when
This
you
is
look
not obviously in hot shot, right?
you look at the code 2 call ratio, it took us about 6 weeks to change the culture when we took the contract. And after about 6 weeks, the cops in the black and white started getting it. And so the response time, the code 2 response time and non-coded 2s, once they are dispatched, are fairly good. And so with transit calls, we're pushing, we've got plenty of cops on the system. So any radio call that comes on the rail system, whether it's non-coded, code 2, or a code 3 call, it's dispatched immediately now.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Rick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councilmember Martinez, for introducing this motion, and to our chair for scheduling it, and for Chief Green for giving us this report, and also for your exceptional work on the Metro contract. I mean, just last night I saw 4 officers. I don't know if they were coming on shift or going off shift, but I saw 4 officers at the Universal Metro station just crossing the street in full uniform with their hats and everything. And it was like, it was after the homeless count. It was like at 11 p.m. and it looked great. And just the fact that there were 4 officers crossing the street, that just looked great.
Yeah, they love the hats.
Nice touch.
Yeah. But, I know you're working on this issue, but I just want to really state how real this issue is, because just last month, one of my own staff members' fiance and mother was sexually assaulted on one of the trains, and it was actually one of the repeat offenders. It was one of the frequent flyers who was a registered sex offender, and I believe he is in custody now, because immediately when they made the report, they knew exactly who it was.
Waiting trial, right?
Yes.
They're waiting trial.
Yeah, they're awaiting trial. So thank you for that. And, it's not just about one incident in my district. This is happening, as stated in your statistics, happening most frequently. And this is a travesty that we need to stop immediately for not just the protection of women who want to take these trains, but for everyone. But I had a couple of questions, and I want to follow up on Councilmember Buscaino's question. So you walked us through the system. So there are those emergency buttons, those on the train decks, on the platforms as well as on the trains itself.
Yes.
So when they press that button, I'm told when you press it on the train, it goes to the operator, train operator, and what happens when you press it on the,
So there's a red phone on the platform where they pick up, and that also goes to the rail operations center on the rail system,
okay.
and then they'll dispatch the police from there.
Is there a red phone on every platform?
I believe there is, but I can check and let you know for sure.
Okay. And also for jurisdictional reporting, you're telling me that you have a detective for all of it and you coordinate, and if they called that red phone, a police officer would have came and they could have filed a report on the spot.
Correct.
I don't want to interrupt, but just before I lose the thought, if you're going to have your folks check to make sure that there's a red phone on every platform, can you also make sure that they're actually functioning?
I will.
Okay.
And just to respond to that, we're in the middle of doing a dual-phase technology assessment, because as you know, environment is everything when it comes to crime. And so we are currently conducting an assessment on all the camera systems, parallel with Metro, and it'll take some time, but there's clearly a lot of ground that we can make with additional cameras and repair some of those cameras. So they're very supportive. It'll just take some time.
And, yeah, go ahead.
Right. So when the incident happened with my staffer, luckily he was there, but I guess he didn't see a red phone or anything like that, so they went to, and the incident occurred between Hollywood and Highland and Universal Station on the train. So when they got off, there was an initial confusion about, because he actually went to the police station, whether they would have to take the police report at Hollywood or Van Nuys Division. Can you talk a little about that? Can they go to any station? Shouldn't they be able to go to any station?
Any police station that you walk into in the city of Los Angeles should take that report. He should not have to be directed from one station to the next. And if the officers do that, they're violating policy. You walk into Van Nuys and it's a North Hollywood occurrence, they take the report in North Hollywood and they will forward it to Van Nuys, or vice versa. But any one of our stations should take that report.
Is there any thoughts for some sort of an educational component, possibly putting on trains and buses information about how to make these reports and what these buttons, about the buttons and the red phones? Because I think part of it was after the incident, you're of course startled, but and there wasn't a police officer around at that moment, or a red phone that was visibly in view, so they didn't know what to do, but just go to a station. And luckily, they did go to a station and make that report.
So we continue to work with Metro on things that we see on the system. They've been a very, very supportive partner. In fact, based on our meeting with Peace Over Violence, they're going to do some more messaging for the sexual harassment piece, the training piece, and the announcements. I can work with them, and the feedback that you're giving me now is important because if those are weaknesses that I'm not seeing in the system. So if you have information like that, get it to us, and we'll work with Metro to try and do additional messaging.
So announcements. So Peace Over Violence is doing announcements on the bus and the trains.
So they have signage up, and we've assessed the signage just recently. And I had a conversation with Alex Wiggins, who's the head of Metro Security. And one of the things that we've asked them to do is increase that signage because a lot of it as you know, in a very crowded subway car or train, it becomes white noise. The announcements and the signage and so on, unless they're really strategically placed, people don't pick up on them. They're in a hurry to get from point A to point B and they don't see it. And so as part of the environmental survey that we're doing on the system with transit, we're looking at issues like that to see if we can improve it.
I think it would be great to work with Metro to maybe our committee could write them a letter and ask for a bigger campaign because it will increase their ridership if people feel safe. And I'm glad to hear there's already signage and announcements, but like you said, in a crowded bus or a crowded train, it becomes just noise and you don't pay attention. So maybe more key placements on the platforms or even some sort of commercial or something like that. But that's great. The last question is, you talked about how you're building out your police force and you're increasing it. And obviously, I don't want to make a comparison in New York because we know their police force is exponentially greater than ours. But obviously in New York at the subway stations, it's really easy to bump into a police officer. What police force do you need to have a robust presence on pretty much every station or every bus or to a point where it's like comparable to the New York system?
So right now, every one of my footbeats is placed on a train based on contractual obligations to MTA. As we rolled out since July in the first 7 months, we noted that there's additional resources we could use, and we're in the middle of a contract amendment with Metro, trying to find out what they can afford. And they, at this point, in the discussion, they've been very generous. And so what we're trying to do is stay within a budget, but get as many police officers out there as we can. With the overtime model, as long as we can run the overtime model, it's much cheaper for Metro to put additional officers on the train on the overtime model. And so between now and July 1st, I'm hoping those contract amendments are done in the next couple of months, and we're going to try and roll that out by July 1 with increased staffing.
Okay. One last question. Code of conduct. You were talking about code of conduct, how you, because you have such a high presence, you give these potential offenders warnings and tell them not that, and you give them 30 days where they can't ride the station or ride the bus.
So Metro's in all the citations that are Metro citations go to a Metro court, and if you get 3 citations within 90 days, you're banned from the system. And I want to say for a period of 180 days. I have to check the time frame. For the other banning, if we can get either the neighborhood prosecutor to get a stay-away order, that works, and we've just had our first successful a project with a neighborhood prosecutor to get that done on this repeat sexual offender. And now working with the Senate bill, as we implement that, that'll give us the potential to have many more stay-away orders based on people's arrests, a single arrest.
So whether whether they're banned for 180 days for a code of conduct, or whether they're banned permanently, and the prosecutor did tell our office that sexual offenders cannot take the Metro or public transit. But how do you, once you get those bans in place for individuals, how do you monitor that, or how do you prevent them from boarding in the first place?
So technology is moving very quick between LAPD and sheriffs and Metro now, and they have a phone that's given every officer that's got a lot of information on it. And one of the things that they're rolling out now is the officer app. Not only does it track every officer's location, but it gives them tremendous ability to pull up data real time. And so those individuals that are banned, you could actually put a photo right there on the phone, and they can scroll through those and be briefed on a roll call. And so the technology piece is starting to catch up, and that'll give these officers, because keep in mind, I get 140 different officers every day on that system. And so the ability for us to brief them and push information is a struggle. So that technology piece we're hoping is in place within the next 2 to 3 months will help quite a bit.
So it's visual, basically.
Yeah, it's visual. And there'll be a list.
Okay.
Okay, Joe, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Rue, for the line of questioning on the, is it the red line, the red button, the red phone that's on the platforms in the event of an emergency that individuals, victims can call in the event of emergency? Who's on the other line of that red line? Or red phone, sorry.
On
the emergency
train
call
or the
button.
bus, on the train, it's a button.
Train.
On the platform, it's a phone. But any 911 call goes straightly to LAPD dispatch. And so if they make a 911 phone call, it'll go straight to our dispatch.
I think the question was on the red.
On the red phone.
On the red phone, that
Right.
goes to the Rail Operations Center, who will in turn contact our dispatch.
Okay. So I'm troubled, Chief, and this is obviously something that I think we can discuss offline immediately after this committee. I'm been personally aware of an incident that occurred 2 Sundays ago on the red line. On the red line, on the red phone at Western and Hollywood, was individual was sexually assaulted. And the individual waited, made the call, pushed the button to rail operations, and was directed, gave some vague information on the other line of where to go to, where to report to, and to the point where the individual waited 25 minutes. and zero response to the point where the individual actually was frustrated and left. Never reported. Something that I want to, we can talk offline here, but again, if this is happening and we're launched this campaign to, off limits, it's off limits, and victims are being frustrated. I think it's maybe a training issue with rail ops. Nothing against our police officers who are there, they're doing their job, but it needs to be addressed. And that's why I went back to my first line of questioning on the response times. Again, if these are victims who are being assaulted and to the point where they've lost faith in the system, from dispatch to rail ops to our men and women who are patrolling our lines, I think it needs to be addressed. So
Be more than happy to take the
I
information.
appreciate that, Chief. Thank you.
And I think maybe in part of that follow-up with CD15, it would be my suggestion to also drill down into the turnaround time for any reported incidents that go directly to rail ops via the red phone. So if there's and what their protocols are to call LAPD. In other words, I would dissect every split second of that process, and making also sure that are they on any systems that capture the time, the hold times and the response times and the transfer times to LAPD, because ultimately that time and that lag time is going to be one of the most critical, because we know our response time is phenomenal because we're well staffed. So I think it's critically important to dissect not just that incident, although I would start with that one because it's very specific and we know the actual location, the time.
Right.
Do they record all the calls that come in? I would treat it as if it were our own dispatch center being called, and rip apart and able to, in order to put it back together, their dispatch protocols and figure out exactly how long does it take them to answer the phone? Are there wait times? Are they consistent at different parts of the day during heavy ridership or not? Does that make a difference? What is their staffing levels? Because also PD in our contract is held accountable to that.
Right.
So if we start hearing we're getting 25-minute response times, but it took them 10 minutes to call us, that's an issue, right? So clearly this is still new. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to do, but I would definitely add that to your phase 2 and looking at hardening that time and reducing it as much as possible, because we have no authority or control, but we have all the responsibility into how they answer that phone, how quickly they answer that phone, how quickly they get on with PD, how quickly we get an officer on the ground at the scene.
Yeah, it's as much as I can, Mr. Chair. As much as, Metro's holding us accountable for our contractual obligations, we ought to hold them accountable as well on the line of communication between rail ops and our men and women in uniform. So.
I appreciate that feedback, and we'll follow up.
Okay. Anything else, colleagues? Okay.
Chair, if I can just
please.
for just 30 seconds. Thank you very much again for scheduling this motion in committee. I am determined to figure this out and get this right. As a mom, I can tell you it's terrifying to sometimes think of having to get on the red line. I won't, for that very reason. I don't have to see the data collection to know that if I feel unsafe to ride the train with my kid, that I'm just simply not going to use it. And I know a lot of people who feel the same way, and it's simply not acceptable. So, Mr. Root, just to reassure you, we are currently working with the It's Off Limits campaign to expand it, to work with Peace Over Violence to improve our signage and our communication with our ridership, to ensure that people have absolutely no doubt, I know there is absolutely no confusion as to how to report a crime or an incident on our rail system or on our bus system. From the red phones on the platforms to making sure the buttons on the buses are working correctly and that someone on the other side understands what's happening and how to guide that person who's picking up the phone. To improving our reporting situation, I think we have a problem with people having confidence that their report is going to take be taken seriously, and that there isn't a 25 to 30-minute wait before somebody can get to them. And improving our data collection. I can't say that enough, and I think Chief Green and I both agree we need to understand what the incidences are, where they're coming from, so that we can better deploy our officers and make sure that crime is down in these particular areas. So again, thank you for your time. There's a lot more work to do, but I am reassured that we're in the right hands with Chief Green. He's 100% committed to this, and it's a good thing that LAPD took over this contract.
I got a question for you to follow up, Ms. Martinez. And before I do, I'll say we have something now that Metro never had, and that Sheriff's never had, and that's Chief Green. And I'll tell you right now, when I found out that we were taking over this contract, and I had my doubts and concerns, but then I found out it was going to be Bob Green leading it and the implementation, those concerns were greatly minimized.
Mr. President, I was grumpy when he called me.
Yes, have no
On
doubt.
a Thursday evening to tell me he was
No
leaving
doubt.
the valley. I wasn't
Yeah.
happy, and I voiced
Yeah.
my concerns about that. But knowing the amazing, his leadership and his commitment to this
For sure.
department and to
Yeah.
our city, I know that we're going to improve our system for all of our riders.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Chief. I have one follow-up for you, Ms. Martinez, and how you want to handle this now. So we have two options. One is to go ahead and move it to full city council, which will have already had the hearing,
Right.
and it'll simply be a note and file. Or we can keep it in committee and have the chief report back when that second phase is enough to report back and what's been done and where we're at. So I'm asking your
That is my
preference.
request, is that I think it's best to keep it in committee. I think there was a lot of good information that was shared today, plus the stuff that we're currently working on in my office. So you tell me if you want to hear this in a couple of months, but I
So we'll keep it here, and then we don't have to commit to when now, and then we can talk offline, and you can let us know as we get closer. And you two are working together along with CD15 on this last incident and start dissecting some of those other issues when you have enough information to come back and figure out either what we found and then what we're doing moving forward based on those findings, right? So we'll go ahead and do that.
Thank you.
Okay? Then that'll be the action of this committee.
Thank you.
All right, colleagues, we have, we'll go ahead and keep item 2 then in committee. On consent, we'll go ahead and move with items 1, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Without objection, that'll be the order. On item 8, there's a technical amendment to refer to the Personnel Committee. So on 8, the technical correction should have been 2 EMS, not 1. So on 1, it should have been to recommendation 2D of the board and 2. So we'll go ahead and make that technical correction and then move it over to the personnel department. On item 3, we have a technical correction, and it'll be simply to instruct the CLA as the lead with the assistance of LAPD, LAFD, and the city attorney to report back on issues related to illegal fireworks and their geographic location and steps that could be taken to curtail their use within the city. The report should include, but not be limited to, all the things that were in the original suggestion that were on the agenda. Any?
And Mr.
in
Chair,
addition?
that's just in relation to the motion I introduced before the holidays, in relation to the proliferation and widespread lawlessness that's growing each 4th of July for the Independence Day celebration, the incredible proliferation of illegal fireworks that start off in a couple of months before. And this motion is very clear on getting robust reports back on what we can do as a city, fire department, police department, et cetera. Went to Sacramento, met with the state fire marshal. This is really, really serious and growing problem. Has been for a long time, but it seems to have reached a crescendo last 4th of July and the months leading up to it. And so I look very forward to getting this back to council, getting this adopted so it comes back to committee so we can hear the reports that include issues hindering effective illegal fireworks enforcement, quantitative data on the number of calls for service related to fireworks and their geographic location, education and outreach strategies, enforcement strategies, legislative and or administrative action at the federal, state, or local level, and examples of successful strategies from other jurisdictions before we have before this problem gets worse. So I appreciate your attention to this matter and would ask that we modify accordingly so we can get back to this committee and have this heard.
Okay.
Thank you.
And add to that a couple of things. One is that, just as a side note, it's also New Year's Eve, and they're not necessarily calls out, excuse me, for fireworks. They're calls out for shots fired most of the time. That's how people are reporting them. I've had the, and I'm going to be careful in saying this, the distinct honor of, as a reserve officer, of working patrol on numerous occasions on the 4th of July. And having that storm log of all the shot fire calls, and that's all you're responding to all night long because fireworks are going off everywhere, and any other incidents that are actually happening, what I would call real incidents, you can't get to because you're responding to these shots fired every minute. And that's really the biggest issue we've got.
Well, and most people can't distinguish the difference between an M80 and a firearm, and so they're thinking it's
so this
guns
is
going off, but it's an M80 or
absolutely a real issue. Yeah.
weaponry from overseas, and it's all uncertified. We're talking about weaponry on our streets, as you mentioned, in many cases New Year's, but certainly the 4th of July, and it's getting worse.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead and move this on to council with those technical corrections, and then yes.
We will move it, adopt it as amended then?
Yes, we'll adopt it as amended.
Okay. And also on number 8, did you approve that one with the corrections, with the technical corrections, or were you still going to hear that item?
Yeah, no, on 8, let me go back to that. That was basically essentially adding it to refer to the Personnel Committee.
So you're approving with those corrections?
Correct.
Thank you.
Approving with that recommendation. I think it was mentioned earlier by a member of the public that was absolutely false and wrong once again, that this was an RFP or should have been gone to an RFP and they were contracting for it. They couldn't, I couldn't remember who mentioned it, but they couldn't be, again, more wrong than ever. This is not, this is a donation. And it's going to be operated by the fire department. So I don't know why we would ever go to RFP with our own fire department to do their own work. So anyway, just want to make sure that that is clear and people understand it. With that, I believe that concludes the agenda, and we are adjourned.
Is there an issue going to the fire station? Let's go into the fire department.